All right, well, this week on Behind the Headlines, we're going to look at the Palo Alto City Council race, which has had some controversy this week. And then we're going to turn our attention to East Palo Alto, where the City Council there faced hundreds of concerned residents about recent evictions. We'll start with the City Council race. There were big moves and big counter moves, and they weren't even by the candidates.
18 days to go, Jocelyn, 18 days. You know what that means.
Gennady.
You know what that means. We're knee-deep in nasty season. So yeah, a few developments over the past week. We had some innuendos, counter-innuendos, suspicions, accusations, big monetary contributions, and two slates of non-candidates going at it.
Well, let's talk about the major contributions and whether or not this really is unprecedented, as one camp has alleged.
As we discussed last Friday on Behind the Headlines, and we've written several stories already on this, Palo Alto Online, basically 5 families who support the more slow-growth candidates, Arthur Keller and Lydia Koo, contributed between them about $160,000 to these two candidates and the Political Action Committee of Palo Alto's for Sensible Zoning, which is the slow-growth citizens group. And so these contributions came in giant checks, mostly after the last filing deadline, which was late September. And so, they raised a lot of suspicion from people who are complaining that this kind of injection of money into the political process is unprecedented. And the 8 former mayors released a letter titled, "Is Someone Trying to Buy Palo Alto City Hall?" which I assume is a rhetorical question. So I'm not going to debate the answer to that.
So these donations have been in the order of $6,500, $5,000?
Yeah, $6,000, $6,500, things like that.
Yeah.
Big checks.
Yeah.
And,
well, I thought it might be useful to talk from a historical perspective about donations in the past and totals in the past, because those are two slightly separate issues. First, the quantities that Keller and Koo now have amassed in their war chests.
Yeah, they're in the $80,000 area. I think last I checked, Lydia was a little bit below it, like $78,000. Arthur was a little bit above it, but they were around $80,000. So they had a pretty solid lead over the rest of the pack. I think the next is like Greg Tanaka with low 50s, something like that. And then there's a couple of candidates who I think Liz Ness would probably be next with like high 40s.
Yeah.
So and the 50s, 40s I think is more kind of typical for this local race. I think it's very unusual to be going towards the 80s, but it's not unprecedented, despite what the letter says. I think, as many pointed out, Greg Scharf raised almost $100,000 for his run, for his re-election campaign a couple of years ago. But the difference is that much of it was his own money, I think.
Sure.
So I think more than half of it was him contributing to his own campaign. So
yeah, so it was actual total raised as opposed to amassed, or
And then we can't forget also, although it was on a county level, last year it was, I believe it was last year or the year before, it was Gary Kremen for the Santa Clara Valley Water District, and that was like more than $300,000.
That was a windfall. For that kind of seed, that was kind of incredible.
That raised a lot of eyebrows.
Yeah. Some people are talking about the assembly race as well. We have to just kind of point out that this is Palo Alto local race, where there have been some candidates who've amassed a lot of money in the past, not many of them. Usually it's between like the 20,000s to the 50,000s.
Yeah, like dozens of thousands of dollars is kind of, let's say, the typical, for the mainstream front-runner candidates. You usually have a few kind of in the back of the pack who make a point of like running low-budget campaigns, and so I'd say the average is far below like 10,000, but of the 4 or 5 top election people, it would probably be in a few dozens of thousands, maybe 50,000, something like that.
Yeah. I looked back at Scharf's fundraising totals, and I think one of his larger donations was 5,000, but most of them were lower than that. And as you pointed out, he self-funded his campaign, which is slightly different than this situation.
And that's one of the points that these mayors are making. It's not so much the size of the aggregate, even though that is a concern. I think the size of each particular check is also kind of troubling for them. I mean, their letter, though, who's trying to buy Palo Alto City Hall, is basically, it points out that in the past, individual donations rarely exceeded $500. Depends on how you define rarely, but it was less common. And for good reason. Candidates did not want the appearance of undue influence from big donors. So maybe if it was like many families contributing $500 each to get to that amount, it'd be less troubling. But the fact that it's these particular, like 5, kind of deciding and coming together, I think that's kind of what is raising these suspicions.
Yeah.
But isn't it also kind of there's another Goliath that was on the other side, and that has to do with the Chamber of Commerce, and that there was really a sense among, they in themselves kind of, from the business standpoint, did something that was kind of unprecedented for Palo Alto politics as well.
Yeah, that's true. And in some ways, the Chamber of Commerce has been the greatest booster for the candidates they're against, because it was their letter that kind of prompted this outpouring of cash. So it's safe to say it did not do as the Chamber was hoping to do. But you're referring to the letter they sent out about a month ago, basically not endorsing, but strongly recommending that its members consider Greg Tanaka, Liz Niss, Don McDougall, and Adrian Fine as their candidates.
Right.
Which kind of which was unprecedented, as you say, in the sense that the chamber doesn't usually choose specific candidates to almost endorse. They usually stick to the issues and advocate for things relating to business tax, registry, whatever it is.
Yeah.
So, and I talked to some of the families who donated the money. I'm just going to mention their names real quick. So,
Sure. Yeah, that's fine.
Michael and Paula Rance, Gabrielle and Thomas Layton, Simone and Trench Cox, Asher Waldfogel, he's a planning commissioner, and Helen McLean, and Mary Ann and Leonard Baker. So I've had conversations with Asher and email exchange with Trench Cox, and basically the one point they made to me is that this was not a quid pro quo. They didn't ask the candidates for anything. They just kind of support what they stand for. Each has like a long history, so we know how they feel about all these issues. And that's kind of one of the things that's being questioned by the other side.
Sure.
But
If there's some sort of issue that, well, let's just raise it right now. So some people have alleged that there's a Castellea tie because Castellea School is undergoing expansion. It's a kind of curious allegation, given that the money is going to residentialists who presumably would be opposed to.
Yeah, I don't report a Castellea tie because I don't think there's a Castellea tie. I mean, yeah, a few of them did serve on the board. That is true. That is a correlation, but.
Well, that would be kind of an opposite correlation because you think
Exactly.
that they
It's
would
like-
want the expansion of Castellea.
The Castellea wants to expand, and a big part of its goal is the TDM measures, the kind of measures that urge people not to drive. And if there's one candidate in this whole race that's been skeptical about these kinds of measures and who doesn't believe that they'll work and wants to see more proof, it's Lydia Koo. So aside from the fact that both Tench Cox and Asher assured me it had nothing to do with it, and Castellea actually reached out to us being like, what the heck? They had nothing to do with this either. So I mean, you could find other connections. I mean, Burn Beecham sits on the Avenidas board maybe, I don't know, and it's like they're expanding, but does that mean that it's like all these people who are contributing tend to be on boards of other places? Or
Sure, they're deeply embedded in the Palo Alto community. Are any of the donor families on the campaign committees? Like, are they chairmen, chairs, or honorary co-chairs, or anything like that of the Keller or
question.
Koo?
Just to clarify, Burn Beecham was a hypothetical example.
Sure, yeah.
So who's watching? I'm just saying, a lot of these people sit on different boards. Most of the mayors, 6 out of 8, have endorsed Fine or Tanaka, so they have a horse in the race. A couple of them are the honorary campaign chairs, which basically
Fine and Tanaka.
Yes, which doesn't mean. It's an honorary role. It's like they don't really do anything extra except it's like a very strong endorsement. So they obviously want Lydia Koo and Arthur Keller to do less well than their candidates. So there's that. I think Gail Woolley is the one mayor who signed on to the sheet who's not affiliated with either Tanaka or Fine, but the others are in one capacity or other.
Well, another question I have is what neighborhoods are these donors coming from? Because my sense is that some of them at least live in downtown North, which has been heavily impacted by growth, the commercial
Downtown
growth.
North, Old Palo Alto, Crescent Park. I think Mary Ann Baker, spoke to the council when she was speaking as a Crescent Park resident concerned about RPP. I think most of them are from the northern half. I'm not sure where Tench and Simone Cox live, but yeah.
So that's another impetus for them to be donating large sums of money as well.
Who knows? It's one of 1,000 correlations you can find. Hey, maybe they all have brown eyes, and this is like a brown-eyed lobby conspiring here. I don't know. It's like the Castellea thing is to me like the kind of the birther movement of this local election. I let other papers deal with it.
That's a kind of the thing that happens with, there's a movement, a counter movement, and then there's outcry about the counter movement, and people drawing connections. Where are there actually connections or not? There are facts, but are we saying everyone draws their conclusions? Some find a very straight line between points A and points B, and some people don't.
It's possible, but I just think Arthur and Lydia's long history of opposing the kinds of big expansion that's being proposed really undermines the kind of the Castellet theory, in my eyes at least.
Yeah.
But again, other people can make their own judgments. It's a judgment call.
Well, let's do some fact checking on this allegation about developer money, because one of the reasons that the donors said that they were making their move was because they felt that development influence on the campaign was too strong. How much money has the development community, and that can be interestingly defined,
Yes.
put into the campaign?
I guess it depends on how you define development.
Okay.
Palo Alto Sensible Zoning, the pro-growth group, which
Anti-growth.
sorry, slow growth group, little difference. They had their own list, which is very different from mine. They include like former planning commissioners who may have supported some projects in
As
their definition
developers.
of developer.
Okay.
Architects, designers, realtors, which is curious because Lydia Koo is a realtor and they support her.
Yes.
So it's like it depends on how expansive definition you have, and it's further complicated by the fact that when you look at the 460 forms, which list the contributions. Very few developers say developer. I think I gave an example of Roxy Rapp. If I could find it, the way he described his position, keeping Palo Alto beautiful and prosperous. So that's his job. And then he's self-employed on the other form. So you have to really go down the list and kind of Google a lot of people. But based on our analysis, Greg Tanaka received probably about $9,000 from the people I would consider developers.
Total.
Yeah, total. And he's got more than 50,000 total raised. So I don't agree with any assertion that he's primarily funded by developers. I do agree with the assertions that some developers have contributed to him. So it's partly true. Half a Pinocchio. I don't know whatever you call it. So.
We'll have to come up with our own rating system.
But I think most of his contributions come from other people kind of like Greg Tanaka, like the professional business people, CEOs, software engineers.
Sure.
And same with Adrian Fine. He got even less from developers, and he's the one who's being targeted by these negative ads.
Yeah.
So he got like, I don't know, about 6,000 by people I consider developers, and most of his donations there's some from Palantir people, but a lot of it's from like high tech, CEOs, professors, and a lot of like small contributions just from families for everybody.
Yeah, the idea about developers, sometimes developers are linked with the rhetoric outside influence, outside money. Are the developers from outside of Palo Alto? Or anyone in this expansive definition of developers and property interests?
Well, I'd say most of them are from inside Palo Alto, but others are from outside but want to build in Palo Alto. I mean, Adrian got some funding from the Windy Hill Ventures people who want to build a building on El Camino and Page Mill. I think they each gave, 500 to Adrian. But I think for the most part, other people are from inside Palo Alto, like Jim Bear, John Goldman from Premier Properties, which is a well-known firm downtown. That's kind of the more typical.
Okay.
Haven't seen anybody from out of state funding
Big
funding these guys.
real estate moguls.
Correct.
Okay, you briefly mentioned negative advertising, so maybe we want to move into another aspect of what's happened this week.
Yes. Back in the knee-deep in nastiness mode. Well, yeah, I mean, I remember last Friday we were talking about this, and I was talking about how money doesn't really matter, because it's not like we have TV ads or videos here anyway, so.
Someone heard you.
Sure enough, someone heard me. We have a negative video ad targeting Adrian Fine. And so, this was kind of unusual about this election season. The video ad, the targeted ad on Facebook, which basically links Adrian allegedly to developers and says, you just don't let developers and people like Adrian Fine push for these condos and high rises, whatever. And he, of course, completely kind of. He did not like that and did not think it represented his position accurately. Yeah. And then that ad goes on to encourage people to vote for Lydia Koo and Arthur Keller because they'll make sure to keep the traffic and parking problems at bay.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, what's interesting about this is that there have been plenty of mailers kind of on a different level, on the state level, with the assembly that are negative advertising. But this
negative? What, you don't like broccoli and Brussels sprouts?
I'm a fan of Brussels sprouts, actually. But, ones by independent groups that are targeting Vicky Vinker, for example.
Right.
So that's something that we've seen definitely at the presidential level and the state level.
Yeah, slightly a different beast, though, because those are mostly independent expenditures, which it's not Mark Berman's campaign. I think that's
True. Yep.
huge majority of mailers are supporting more permanent, but it's not his campaign. It's like independent expenditure groups tied with education, realtors, sending big flyers with beautiful vegetables on them.
Do we know who's responsible for the negative video? Basically, it has to do with Adrian Fine.
Lydia and Arthur.
Oh, so they are the ones.
Oh yeah, they
okay.
own it. They think that's his
Okay.
positions before he flipped them. They say he's pivoting. He's talked in the past about how he thinks the 50-foot height limit is arbitrary, and that some of our best buildings are taller than that, Hotel President and whatnot. He voted against the office cap initially when the Planning Commission was reviewing it, and so yeah, they're pointing out these things as indications of he's pivoting now for this election season. But look what he said in the past. We can't trust him with slow growth. So I mean, Adrian disavows it, but his positions have been kind of fluid. So I can't say it's a full-on Pinocchio, but
Right. But yeah, there's been some movement on that area. Spending limits. So one council member posted on Town Square that he thinks that maybe this is an issue that is ripe for discussion. What did Tom Du Bois say?
yeah, this was just on Town Square. He basically posted a comment pointing out that he's glad that other people stepped in to kind of support the residentialist people because he believes this will help even out. By the end of the day, they'll have pretty much sort of level playing field as far as money raised. But he also goes on to say that campaign finance is worth discussing. And actually, Adrian Fine also said the same thing. He's like, no matter who wins or loses, this huge injection of money suggests that maybe next year campaign finance is something the council will take up. But we'll see.
We'll see once the
I have no
dust
reason,
is settled.
I have no reason to think there's going to be a huge issue after the election season. But
Yeah. Yeah, so just talking with our colleagues at the Mountain View Voice, the Mountain View has a voluntary spending limit of $25,000, which inherently limits donation amounts as well. So there's precedent in other cities in this area for having some sort of cap on election spending, which would make some of our small campaign contribution candidates pretty happy.
what will we talk about?
That's right.
What about our needs?
Takes out all of the drama. Do you want to touch upon an allegation of impersonation as well?
Still looking into that.
Okay.
It's,
Okay, well, that might be the subject of definitely a story, possibly another.
But suffice to say that there's a couple of political action committees operating now, and which is also makes this
Actually a little
election kind of unique.
Yeah. Okay. All right, well, why don't we leave it there for this week, and we will turn our attention to East Palo Alto and an issue of a whole another nature. There have been a lot of evictions recently due to code violations in terms of housing. This issue came up previously, you reported on it last month.
Right.
And now the issue finally came to the City Council on Tuesday.
Yes.
What was the tenor of that meeting, and what ideas?
Well,
come
there
out of it.
was an absolute overflow. Obviously, there's a tremendous amount of concern in the community, and across the board, from residents and advocates to landlords as well. There were a lot of people. There were a lot of people from the faith community there who are supporting not evicting residents. And what's kind of come out of it, I mean, there was an overflow crowd. It was rather surprising. When I got there, you could not get in the door. There were people in the hallway looking in. So most people were pretty civilized. There were a couple of people who were just shouting and screaming because they had, they're on the street. And they just feel that they've been in the community 40, 50 years, went to school there and everything, and now they're finding themselves displaced.
So just to set this up, just to remind people what the issue is. So there are a number of homes and illegal additions, sometimes the granny unit type situation, that have been deemed in violation of city codes, hazardous in some cases to humans inhabiting it. So the city hired new code enforcement, and they've basically been doing a kind of
A cleanup job.
cleanup, yeah.
Well, I have not had a chance to fact check this bit of information, but some of the numbers that people have thrown around is that there are about 2,000 secondary dwelling units in East Palo Alto, many of which are illegal. The city has recognized that there's a big problem with housing, just because there's a housing crisis in the whole
Area.
everywhere. And East Palo Alto residents have borne the brunt of evictions or lack of being able to find affordable housing just because many people really don't have very high-paying jobs. And one of the things that's happened is that the city both tried to put together an ordinance that would allow for secondary dwelling units, granny units. They have, I believe, since 2010, something like they've approved more than 30, I think the number is either 32 or 36 of these units. So they're legal, and they've been, they've come under, they've gone through all the codes, they've done what they were supposed to do, and they're providing secondary housing for people, low-income housing for people. But the other issue is that there are many, many places where people have just set up campers, tents, lean-tos in their backyards.
You saw some of the photos that the city had provided.
Yeah.
What are people living in?
They're often living in. They might be living in a trailer in the backyard. They are living in sometimes even just a converted. What do you call it? Like a not
carport?
a garage, like a carport. Yeah, that type of thing. Garages.
Do these carports have like?
Sometimes they don't even have a
sides and.
Sometimes barely that. Sometimes they barely even have sides on them. They really don't have structure. Someone will just put up plywood without any kind of cross beams or anything like that. There was one really scary example that they had a photo of. There were like 3 of these propane tanks that were outside the building, and they had one for each unit gathered for fuel, and then rubber hoses going in. And one of the building inspector basically said, if that went up, it wouldn't only take out the house, but it would take out like 3 other houses on that block.
Wow.
So those are the kinds of things, a lot of external wiring that shouldn't be there, that, just all kinds of things, plumbing issues. There have been, this is nothing new for East Palo Alto. It's been an ongoing problem for many, many years.
Well, I want to ask about that. Given that it has been an ongoing problem for many, many years, what gave the impetus for this to become such an urgent issue just in recent months?
Okay, well, I would say there are a number of things. First of all, it's been much more apparent. So you see, if you're driving down the streets, you will see many more cars, even double parked on the streets, mounds of garbage, a lot more resident complaints. People, basically about 62% are people who are calling on their neighbors. The reason why it's starting to get so much attention is because the city now has the money to hire additional code enforcement officers. I believe in addition to a building inspector and a manager, they have 3 officers now, where before they only had 1. And each one has a backlog of something like 80 cases that are open.
Wow. So I'm kind of hearing 2 different areas of why this is happening. One is the kind of quality of life issues we hear about, too many cars, too much trash, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And the other is like the safety argument, the hoses you were talking about, the legal hookup. Which do you think is the more prevalent that's causing the city to take these actions?
I would say, from the city's perspective, it's going to be the safety issues.
They're not just doing the political thing that the residents are concerning.
No.
Politics is not a front.
No, I don't believe it is. I think it really has to do with the safety issues, and they brought up many times. In fact, one of the vice mayor, Larry Moody, said that he can still smell the stench of Fordham Street or Fordham Avenue, and that was a case in which 9 people died. They were basically burned alive in a house that had illegal bars on the windows. And he said, it still sticks with me. I don't think I ever want to experience anything like that again. I don't think anybody in this community wants to. And I believe it was in January, there was something like 8 people were displaced, and essentially it was because of a secondary unit that was an illegal unit, and they had a dryer fire because the dryer was outside the building. And so there's a real serious risk of many more people being injured or killed.
Yeah, let me interject here that the city staff report that was released in preparation for the meeting on Tuesday indicated that 80% of the code enforcement violations that have been
of the red tags,
the red tags have been fixed, abated, or are in the process of abatement. So they're not just, so one half of the equation is what do the landlords do who don't have the financial means to fix this up. Another part of that is also what did the people who've been living there do, because now they have nowhere to live. But the flip side is that it's actually producing some results.
Yeah, and I think the city wanted to point out that the majority of these cases are ones in which people did comply and did fix the buildings. But there are some cases where they can't do that at all. You know, it's just like right next to a fence or something like that, and they have to take it out. The city is also constrained by state law. Under state law, they have to, for health and safety reasons, they've got to abate any red tag buildings that they find where there's any kinds of hazards. They have to abate that within 30 days. What's happened, though, is that, and they do have leeway to actually abate it sooner. So what's really been happening is there have been a lot of evictions with just 10-day notices. And the cities, I guess from the code enforcement perspective, they say a lot of these landlords have been told, they've been trying multiple times, like 10 to 15 years of trying to work with them, not even fining them. And the landlords don't, you see, the resident, the person who's living there, the renter doesn't know because they're not the ones who are getting the notices. It's the landlords. And so the landlords are not necessarily telling their tenant, hey, you know, you might have to move out of here. All of a sudden, here comes they slap the red tag on the door and they're told you have got to get out in 10 days. And so people are ending up on the street. And it's a lot of families are being broken up. There are a lot of people are ending up, you know, like the kids are having to go into shelters. The parents are, you know, living in the car. There's one case where a woman is living at St. Francis of Assisi Church. So that's, you know, it's a real issue. And in terms of the number of people, I believe there's something like 52 people who basically since this summer have been evicted and have nowhere to go and now homeless.
So the city council did decide to do something about this. This was the first time they were able to take action in response to this crisis. So what plans do they have to move forward? They can't establish a moratorium on evictions because that's against state law. But what could they do?
That was one of the things that advocates for community, advocates put together a community white paper. And one of the things they asked for was a moratorium up to 2 years that people could get their units basically back into compliance. But they're not allowed to do that under state law. So what the city is looking at doing is they directed staff to basically ask them to look into changing their ordinance that would make it, instead of a 10-day eviction, up to 30-day eviction, but that would also still be at the discretion of the building inspector or the code enforcement officer. So that would give people a few more weeks. It's not many, but they'd get a little bit more time. The other thing they're doing is they're looking at developing a task force that would be community-based, but would also have professionals such as, you know, someone who might be from like Rebuilding Together, some other organization, to help try to figure out how we can get as many buildings as possible into compliance and you know, keep people from being evicted. There might be ways to get money. You know, how do we get to the bottom of this problem in East Palo Alto?
All right then. So I guess we'll be continuing to follow that issue as it unfolds, and we will definitely be continuing to follow the city council race
for 18 more days.
For 18 more days, and then we should mention that on election night you can definitely tune in to paloaltoonline.com to find out the results as they flow in. There are a lot of people who are doing mail-in ballots. Hopefully by 8 o'clock that night we'll see kind of a large base of election results already. All right, well, thanks for the conversation, and you can follow us on Twitter as well, twitter.com/Palo Alto Weekly. That's it for this week on Behind the Headlines.